Greetings to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very important program. We have two very accomplished legislators who have done phenomenal work together in the U.S. Congress, and I'll introduce them shortly. I want to thank our statesmanship sponsors for their support and mention that this program is part of our statesmanship program series. So we really appreciate the support that you give us for doing this at FMC. Also want to mention that our two guests, Congresswoman DeGette and Congressman Upton, are both former statesmanship honorees to highlight their contributions to the enactment of the 21st Century Cures Act, which is going to be part of the major discussion we're having in today's program. So let me start by introducing our two guests more formally. Representative Diana DeGette serves Colorado's 1st Congressional District. She's now in her 13th term, and she is recognized as a leading voice in the nation's ongoing healthcare debate. She chairs the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has very important responsibilities overseeing key agencies in the federal government, such as the Department of Health and Human Services, Environmental Protection Agency, Food and Drug Administration, and the list goes on. She's been a leading voice in the COVID pandemic response and also ensuring that the EPA is properly enforcing our nation's environmental laws while working to lower the cost of insulin for millions of Americans who rely on this very important pharmaceutical treatment. Representative Fred Upton serves Michigan's 6th Congressional District. Fred has been a longtime advocate for greater emphasis on biomedical research to improve public health. Fred served as the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee from 2010 to 2016, and where he really worked on these issues. And in 2014, along with Representative DeGette, Fred launched the 21st Century Cures initiative. This was a bipartisan effort to bring researchers, industry, and patients together to speed up the discovery, development, and delivery of life-saving cures. The pursuit of these 21st century cures also supports employers in Southwest Michigan, where Fred's district is located, and the jobs by ensuring that the United States remains the world's leader in medical innovation. So marking the culmination of this 3-year journey, President Obama signed the 21st Century Cures Act into law on December 13th, 2016. Very important piece of legislation. It proved to be very prescient given what we're going through now with the pandemic. And so with this introduction of our two very distinguished guests who are accomplished legislators, we're going to start right into some Q&A and really explore this topic further. So Diana, let me start with you. The two of you came together on this. What was the main purpose of introducing 21st Century Cures in 2016?
Well, Charles, thank you for that question. Thanks for moderating, and thanks to the former members for hosting this forum. One of the most important parts of my resume you did not mention is that I'm the co-chair of the Japan study group for the former members.
And I meant to mention that and I forgot.
That's okay. And I'm hoping maybe we can get Fred and Amy on one of our trips to Japan. That's a really wonderful activity. The study groups are a wonderful activity that the former members does. So to your question, the main purpose of introducing the bill, Fred can really speak to that too, because he was the chairman of the committee at that time. And what we really saw was that that biomedical research from the lab all the way to the patient was not keeping up with new advances in research techniques and in communication to do an overhaul over the way we do research in this country. And we worked very hard over 4 years. Was it 4 years, Fred? It was a long time. 3 years. Developing, we worked hard developing the protocols and I like to say the guts of the bill was 350 pages of new protocols for the NIH, the FDA, the CDC, really, really streamlining the way we do biomedical research in this country. And then we also had $6 billion for initiatives like the Brain Initiative and the many other initiatives at the NIH. And this was a Herculean effort. It involved not just our colleagues, but the agencies themselves, patient advocacy groups, research hospitals, angel investors, any stakeholder that we could think of. We talked to them and we worked with them in developing this legislation.
Thanks, Diana. Fred, this was an amazing accomplishment in many ways. You were chairman of the committee. This was, in a sense, your brainchild to move forward on this. I remember I was in the House. I remember hearing you talk so passionately about it. And you came together with Diana to make this a bipartisan effort between the two of you, but also broadly the committee. And you guys, over a 3-year period of sustained effort, drove this. You know, what's your view of the purpose of this, and how do you see things going forward now?
Well, first of all, Charles, it's great to be with you. And even though you're 650 miles, I think, away from me now, I don't know where exactly you are. I'm in Michigan. I know Diana's in Denver. My son actually lives in her literally across the street from where her mother grew up. I mean, it's talk about a small world. And she has been an outstanding partner, not only when I was chair, but now as Republicans are in the minority, because we're working on the next version. We're not done. And I just got to say that, you know, I got on the health subcommittee in 1991. And as Diana and I have both said, disease doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or, you know, whatever. We are all impacted by these tragic, cruel diseases that take life way too early. And then when you're on the health subcommittee, there's a lot of folks that walk in your door and they have these awful diseases, particularly children with cancer. I mean, just things that you're just so sad. And we decided we want to make a difference. What could we do? And so not only did we have things like the Brain Initiative and things like that, but we also increased the money for the NIH by literally $45 billion over a 10-year span above the baseline that they would have had. And Paul Ryan, pretty good fiscal conservative. Remember, he worked under Jack Kemp a lot of years ago. He insisted that we pay for it. And we made a big mistake in that Chuck Schumer stole all of our money and used it for something else. So we actually came up with 2 pay-fors, but we did it. And we passed it 392 to 26 in the House and 92 to 8 in the Senate. And then Vice President Biden did a wonderful job. He worked with us. We did a number of different things, but it was bipartisan from the get-go. And we needed every day in that session. As you said, President Obama signed it on December 13th. Just 5 weeks before he was no longer president, but literally the last bill that he signed. So now we're working on the next version. It's called 2.0. And in fact, before the end of October, we are going to be introducing that bill. It's, again, obviously bipartisan. This time it'll be DeGette Upton instead of Upton DeGette, but it doesn't really matter because, as I learned when I worked with President Reagan, it doesn't matter who gets the credit if you get the thing done. And that's what we are all about. So what are we going to do? Well, telemedicine. I mean, remember, we started this thing way back in end of 2014, 2015. We didn't have broadband like we do today. We don't have telemedicine. That's one of the things we've learned from COVID. And as we look back in hindsight, because of what we did on cures, and my largest employer does happen to be Pfizer, when they got the emergency use authorization, the EUA, they were able to actually begin producing it months ahead of getting the EUA, let alone the full FDA approval that they got, 10 months later. But when they got that EUA, they could literally roll out millions of doses, literally a day, out of their Kalamazoo facility, and they did. And it was like a moonshot. I mean, I remember people lining up on the streets. I mean, they broke into the news, the TV, to show the trucks going to UPS and FedEx across the country. And literally, Americans were able to get that vaccine, that first vaccine, maybe 8 or 10 months earlier than they otherwise would have been because of what we did on cures. And so as we look at 2.0, not only are we going to look at telemedicine, but we're going to look at using real world evidence. We learned that minorities weren't fully accounted for in the trials. And we insisted that there were no shortcuts in the FDA approval. So those weren't done. But, there was a real reluctance, particularly with people of color, from actually allowing their arms to get that shot because it wasn't quite the same. But we're also excited about a new initiative that President Biden has led on and announced earlier this spring, and that's called ARPA-H. In essence, duplicating what DARPA did for the Defense Department with health, to be able to go outside of the box, I guess you could say, to be nimble, to look at real exciting new challenges that might, the bureaucratic maze of things may delay or even kill that innovation. And our appropriator friends, again, bipartisan, they've already approved $3 billion in fiscal year 22 for that. It's already passed, but obviously we have to get through this continuing resolution because it wasn't in last year's funding bill. So Diana and I have been working hand in hand with the White House, with each other, to really make sure that we can do this the right way as we unfold this a little bit later this month. But it's going to be an exciting time, and our goal is to get this 2.0 done to the president before the calendar year's out, before Christmas.
Thanks, Fred. This advanced research program, similar to DARPA, the ARPA-H program, it seems to me this is really important because we saw, looking back at the development of mRNA vaccine technology, that could have easily failed 10 years ago for lack of grant funding. And, so understanding the importance of this kind of basic research, which then leads to products and then ultimately, full-scale usage by patients who are in need, whether it's a vaccine or a new treatment. Making sure we have that seamlessness from very basic research where the immediate applications may not be known to moving all the way to the final products is really important. And I think that's going to be a very important piece that you're going to have in there. Diana,
one thing, we listened to all the experts. Diana and I didn't devise this thing. We listened, and then we wrote with legislative counsel. So we had a ton of roundtables. We went all over the country, from MD Anderson to Mayo Clinic. I went to Denver. Diana went to Kalamazoo, University of Michigan, Mayo, all these places. And they shared with us what they wanted to do. And I can remember early on, I worked with John McCain and Henry Waxman and Paul Wellstone back in the 90s to double the money for the NIH. And I remember talking to some researchers who at the time, it was before the internet, literally loaded up a U-Haul trailer, drove it to DC, unloaded the thing, and, 1 out of 10 applications made it through the gauntlet. Most of them were worthwhile, but they just didn't have the resources to get it done. That's what we changed. And that's what we want to do with ARPA-H, the same thing, to really look at what's new and exciting, particularly as we deal with something like this pandemic, which is, at this point already taken over 700,000 American lives in just a short period of time.
Diana, what's your perspective on what you're trying to accomplish with Cures 2.0?
Yeah, well, just to expand on what Fred was saying, because you mentioned the mRNA platform for COVID research, that was out there, but it hadn't been used, certainly not as effectively as it was with the vaccines for COVID-19. And what happened, and the reason why we needed 21st century cures, is that the agencies, the FDA and the NIH, all of the agencies were then able to take a lot of the provisions that we had in 21st century cures to be able to create Operation Warp Speed, where they were able to partner with the government agencies, particularly the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies and the researchers, to quickly develop the vaccines, to be able to go through a full clinical trial process, but in an expedited way. In the past, clinical trials would take like 10 years. And we didn't have the luxury of 10 years. So they were able to expedite those clinical trials. And then the government was able to work with the pharmaceutical companies to give them some certainty for production of those vaccines at the same time that the research was being done. And remember, there were some vaccines developed that never ended up going into the approval process because they didn't work. So that's the kind of nimbleness that we really needed to have. And it taught us a lot. So Fred talks about ARPA-H. And we want to be really clear about this. ARPA-H is sort of building on that kind of speed and nimbleness, but with research for so many diseases that we really haven't been able to crack. So it's going to be, the director will be there for a short targeted amount of time. The staff will be there for a short targeted amount of time, and they will have a lot of freedom with the resources we give them to research these diseases that we need to. But I want to stress, this does not substitute for the basic research we're doing at the NIH. And that is really, really critical to say. And something that Fred and I feel quite strongly that we need to have very strong authorizing language, because we don't want to have a situation where we give $2 billion to ARPA-H, and then it gradually gets subsumed into the important basic research that NIH is doing. And then some of the other things that we're trying to achieve, as well as ARPA-H through Cures 2.0, we've got a provision on public health in there to help us to standardize some of the procedures that we've developed, like national testing, sources of coverage, and so on, the lessons we learned through the pandemic. And then we also, and I think one of the most important parts of 2.0 is we really go back, as Fred said, to a patient-centered approach for research, and increasing diversity in clinical trials, increasing health literacy, getting patient experience data so that researchers can figure out how the patient experience is when they're researching all of these new things. And then the last thing that I want to mention is research around CMS, because if you can't, if the FDA approves a new drug or a device, but you can't get coverage for payment, then you might as well not have that new treatment. And so everybody has agreed that sort of the weak link in cures in 21st century cures was this issues of coverage. So we work with the agency, we work with all of the stakeholders to help be able to update and improve CMS so that we can get coverage for things that are approved by the FDA.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that issue of coverage, because I worked on separate legislation when I was in Congress to try to streamline that process, and that was a real deficiency. And the fact that you're looking to address that now is critically important, not only for pharmaceuticals but also for medical devices, because that area in my old specialty of cardiovascular and thoracic surgery, the devices are amazing these days. But if you can't get these things, get the coverage piece in place with Medicare, then you're sort of in limbo, and it really stifles the implementation of these great new therapies.
And Charles, some of the rules, it's not the fault of the agency. Some of the rules that they've had to operate under have just been very archaic. Just briefly, I mentioned I'm the co-chair, or you mentioned I'm the co-chair of the Diabetes Caucus. And we had a situation a few years ago where CMS was able to cover one type of insulin pump, but it wouldn't cover a different type of insulin pump because the technology was different and their rules didn't allow that to happen, even though they felt like it should be covered. So we're going to try to fix some of those problems.
Okay. So what are the challenges now going forward? with this bipartisan effort. I know both of you have great stature on the committee. The committee is probably committed to doing this, but we're in a very partisan environment. Broadly in the House, the Senate has its own partisan problems. How do you see this playing out? And trying to get this package, this legislative package done in this current environment. What are the challenges?
Well, COVID has changed things a lot. I mean, it's much more difficult. You're right, Charles. It's a lot more partisan than ever before, which is really disappointing. But just because of COVID, I mean, we have these Zoom markups. You're not there in person, and not everybody, including staff, has been vaccinated. We've had a number of colleagues, we have a couple colleagues die, but we've had, 40 or 50 that have gotten the variant as well. So we're all sort of walking on eggshells, and it's just different. I mean, when I was chairman, we probably had 8 or 9 hearings a week. Now we were lucky to have 1 or 2 because we're not using the second committee room, and it's way different than ever before because of COVID and what's going on. But our goal is pretty clear. Now that especially the money's been appropriated, the president's behind it, we want to do together. This will be the ARPA-H stuff is going to be a major engine with what we're doing. It'll be comprehensive, and we really want to get it done before the end of the year. One of the things that's different as well is as we deal with these multi-trillion-dollar bills, someone's got to write them. That's ledge counsel, and so they don't answer the phone on anything else that they might be up to. So we've been, dealing with ledge counsel for months, trying to get them to answer the phone, let alone write this stuff to make sure that it's correct, and that has delayed our process as well. But we're coming to a head. Diane and I, our staffs are really brilliant. We're coming to a conclusion where we're just about ready now to introduce this thing, and we're going to try to make sure it's a hot knife through butter, reaching out to the White House as well as to the Senate. You're right. We're going to use some of the history and the goodwill that we achieved with 2.0 with Cures, because with 2.0, we need those relationships. People need to know we're honest and hardworking, and that's going a long way to try and get this thing done as well. So we're excited, and we also want to get it ahead of the political scheme. I mean, this has never been a political issue, but we want to get it up. We want to get it done before 22 is really upon us, and people get long knives out and you can't do this or that. I mean, this is not only good for the nation, it's good for the world.
I'll agree with Fred. I think that our biggest challenge right now is the congressional calendar and the limitations that we've had. But I will also say, despite the hyperpartisanship we're seeing, I know my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that I've talked to are really excited about Cures 2.0 because they were so proud of the effort, particularly the Energy and Commerce Committee members. They were so proud of the effort that the whole committee made to pass that original bill, and they want to do something for the benefit of their constituents that will really move the ball forward on healthcare research. So I think that a benefit is that we really have that goodwill sort of lingering from the first bill, and I think we hope that we can use that. And the Senate's always a challenge, but we overcame it last time. So you know what our dear friend and mentor used to say, John Dingle.
Yeah. Well, John Dingle, we started this. Debbie's been a good player on this, but every member. Remember when we moved this through Energy and Commerce, we passed it 53-0.
But John Dingle used to say, you might be my opponent, but the real enemy is the Senate.
Right. Yeah, that's that rings true in many instances. But you should be really. I know you're both very proud of this effort because it's not often that you can put landmark legislation together, and it's even less prevalent today in the partisan environment. So it's been a tremendous achievement on the part of both of you and your leadership that you provided in this. I want to pivot a little bit to a couple of problems. One, substance abuse and the mental health crisis in the country. Obviously, research is going to play a major role in moving the needle and in improving care for so many who need it. And I'm sure this is something you're probably both thinking about in the context of Cures 2.0. Could you comment on those two issues and how you're thinking about it as you put the legislation together?
Well, you know, when we did Cures, we did have a mental health component. And it's amazing to say this as we talk now in 21, but we put $1 billion in it. And that was a heck of a lot of money back in 2016. Now we're dealing with trillions. So, but we know, and I'm on the, Kevin McCarthy appointed me as one of the Republicans on a bipartisan opioid conference, and, fentanyl and all those different issues. And we got some really good people and literally have Zooms every week, but this is an issue that's not going away. We need more research. We need more assistance for families dealing with these issues, whether it's a spouse or a child. And we know some of the crime statistics and things that are out there. So this doesn't specifically, hone in on that, but it's part of sort of an overall approach. And I know as we look at some real champions, we lost a good one in Patrick Kennedy when he chose not to run again, but our committee's been dealing with this. There's a couple different bills. Maybe we'll have something as part of this, we'll see, but it's an issue that we are all very concerned about.
Yeah, the oversight subcommittee, actually, it was when Fred, I think when you were chairman of the full committee, the oversight committee did a whole series of hearings on the opioid crisis and mental health. And and it was really eye-opening and shocking. You've seen a lot of that information now coming out with the lawsuits against the Sackler family and others. And so Congress continues. We've done some legislation over the years on this, and we've put money into research and also treatments. But I will say, and I think Fred will probably agree with this, we need to do much more. And we need to do much more in mental health programs for young people, for teenagers and children. The pandemic has really opened up a whole issue around mental health with young people. And of course, the opioid epidemic continues with us. So I think this is something that the Energy and Commerce Committee needs to keep working on. Fred, I'm glad, I didn't know you were on that task force, and I'm glad that you are. We have some wonderful colleagues, Annie Custer and others, who
David
are
Crone.
on
Yep.
yeah, who are on some of our
Bipartisan
Energy and Commerce.
bicameral.
Yeah, and so I'm hoping we can do much more. It's really an issue that needs more attention.
Yeah, I think also in the development of pharmaceutical treatments for severe mental health conditions, obviously there's a lot of room for improvement there in terms of the spectrum of medications that could be used to help people who are struggling with these problems. So I think what you've done to focus the research effort on patients and patient concerns, hopefully will bring big dividends down the line on the mental health side and substance abuse side as well. So it's been a few years now. Cures is in place. The implementation. What are you satisfied with the implementation of everything you envisioned in the 2016 Cures Act? Are there areas that need improvement and further oversight?
Well, I mean, we've had a number of it's so interesting because we've had hearings on 21st Century Cures implementation in and of itself, but then the various components of the legislation, because it was so broad, they creep into many other issues. And what we have found during the last number of years since we passed 21st century cures is that overall it's made a tremendous impact. I mentioned the development of Operation Warp Speed with COVID and many other places where 21st century cures has borne fruit. But the reason why Fred and I decided that we needed to do Cures 2.0 was because we did see so 2.0 is sort of targeted at addressing some of these areas that we saw needed improvement, particularly the patient-centered development of research and cures, the diversity and so on. And then of course, ARPA-H is a new idea that President Biden had when he came into office. And so some of what you see here in this proposed legislation is as a response to what we saw as the deficiencies in implementations of the original bill.
And so, Charles, one of the things that we learned in our many roundtables that propelled us to drive us towards getting this thing done, and we needed every minute. I mean, Diana and I have a story about we're each taking our family walks on Thanksgiving, and we're talking to each other, and who's going to talk to Ryan and Pelosi and everything else, and how we're going to get this through the Senate. But you know, one of the things that we learned was that back then, the venture capital efforts dropped by 50% in just a couple of years in investing in America. They're going overseas because our structure for the approval of drugs and devices was so lengthy that they chose someplace else. So as we got into this COVID era, the whole domestic supply chain, everything else, we want it here. We don't want to rely on someplace else. And so when we change that by expediting the approval of drugs and devices, we're actually bringing those approvals, that investment back here, but we're still not where we want to be. But that was a lesson that we learned, and ultimately where we want to be, whether we're maybe closing down this pandemic or getting ready for the next one, we want to be prepared and be able to have the resources here and the jobs here, and also the brains here too. We want that investment here in this country to continue to make us the place where people want to invest and solve the problems that face the world.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. Yeah, it raises another question in my mind. You know, one of the very last things I was working on when I was in Congress was what to do about drug-resistant bacteria and the infections that occur, you know, after surgery or in hospitals, hospital-acquired infections. And, you know, this was something, it was hard for, it was an area that did not attract investment directly. And so coming up with new antibiotics to deal with, you know, drug resistance, antibiotic resistance was really tough. And I raise that because you were mentioning investment going overseas and making sure that, you know, investments are actually tackling problems that are out there. This is, I think, still a fundamental issue with regard to the basic research that's needed to move forward on those kinds of drugs. Is there any new thinking on that type of problem and others? I mean, vaccines are another issue that were neglected for a long time. Now all the focus is on vaccines, but, you know, matching the investment into these kinds of, you know, really serious problems that are out there in the healthcare system.
Well, ARPA-H, the funding that is going to help, but also the boost in money. I mean, if you looked at the money for the NIH, and yes, we did double it back in the 90s, but then it sort of froze, didn't keep up with inflation. So the injection that we gave it is going to help find those resources. And again, it's always been bipartisan. I mean, if you ask a man or woman on the street about health research, and who doesn't have a friend or a neighbor or a family member that you know, didn't make it with cancer or Alzheimer's? I spent a lot of time earlier this week with the Alzheimer's group, and you know, that's going to cost Medicare $1 trillion in just a few years, every year. So let's take that money and invest it. So not only does it not hurt so we can find a cure for not only the patient, but the caregivers and the family members who lose everything when that happens. And there's so many diseases like that. So this is a life-saving thing that most Americans, based on the vote that we had, 392 to 26, and I will say, and I say this with a smile, we know who those 26 are. but we had the margin. Maybe some of them are former members now. But the bottom line is this: I say this in all seriousness. We came together. We came together not only as a committee, 53-0, but also the leadership on both sides. Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, obviously Diana and I. But we got the job done. And you know, Mitch McConnell, then the majority leader, called it the most significant piece of legislation that I think passed in that decade. He was great. And Lamar Alexander, he was terrific. And Patty Murray and Dick Durbin. I mean, we had people on both sides of the aisle, and we worked shoulder to shoulder to get it done. And we needed, as we said, every day, including Thanksgiving Day, to get the sucker across the line.
Yeah, I really, with respect to the antibiotic resistance issue, I really think this has been something. I know you worked hard on it when you were in Congress, Charles, and the committee has been working on it for some years. And we've put money into it and research into it from a federal government perspective, but it's still one of those thorny questions that persists. And I really think that Fred's right, that ARPA-H could really take this on as one of their tough issues to solve. Something else that has been a real issue, I'm sure you know that, is the issue of developing antimicrobial innovations. And we have, there's a bill that in the House, Representative Young and Doyle are sponsoring this bill, and we have included the provisions of that bill into Cures 2.0.
That's the Pasteur Act, right? That's the Pasteur Act.
Yeah, it's the Pasteur Act, and what it does is it creates a subscription model to pay for the critically needed drugs. So, you know, we continue to try to chip away at all of these tough issues. But again, if you can have a system which encourages development of treatments, drugs and devices for diseases for diseases that we don't have a cure for, and then if you can expedite the way you go through the review and approval process and pay for it. And also, I really think post-market review is critical, because when you do things, you know, one of the things Fred and I and others have worked on is this notion of breakthrough therapies, where if you come up with a treatment for a disease that doesn't have a treatment, you can go to the head of the line. But if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that there's robust post-market review to make sure that the drug or device A works and B is efficacious or is safe. So
Right.
anyway, it all goes together, and these are really tough problems that we have. But fortunately, I think we're beginning to develop the exciting research techniques to look at them in depth.
So I think, I don't know if we have any questions from the audience participating in our program. Grayson, have you tabulated any questions? I'm hearing crickets.
So we have one question. Do either of you see drafting a Cures 3.0 in the future? Like, do you think that there will need to be a follow-up? Or is there anything that you can't get done you're trying to now?
I'll tell you, if we thought there was something that needed to be done, we would put it in Cures 2.0. We were already in the process of developing Cures 2.0 when the Biden administration came up with the idea of ARPA-H. And so that's when we decided, we met with the White House. We actually met with President Biden and Vice President Harris. and a small group of members to talk about this, we decided to include it in the bill. So I'm sure we're going to need more innovations down the road, but for now, we're hoping to put what we need into this legislation.
And let me just add, one of the highlights of what we did was we listened. There's a lot of experts out there, and yesterday I spent a good time with former FDA officials and others. We need to listen to the experts. There isn't time enough in the day. I mean, we don't have the PhDs, they do. And so as they share ideas with us, we want to help them do their job to help folks across the country. So this won't be the end all. It's not going to be a perfect bill. There'll always be more that we can do. And this is just one more step to getting us where we want to be.
Yeah, and I would say that, oversight as it's implemented will always, find small problems here and there that you have to correct. And, it's always an ongoing process. Any other questions, Grayson?
We don't have any right now. Audience, if you would like to ask a question, just write it in the chat real quick.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left, or 4 minutes left now. I want to be respectful of our these two members' time. It's a busy time. Telemedicine, it's been a big success with COVID. Obviously, it's costly. And I think, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done in looking at what worked, what didn't work, how is it most effectively used? Where do you draw the lines? I know both of you have worked on this issue over the years. Any thoughts on that at this stage?
Well, we spent so many years, when you were there too, we've spent so many years advocating for telemedicine and debating how we could achieve it. But for whatever reason, we were never really able to do it. And suddenly with COVID, we had to do it. Right. And so there's a great support in Congress for making that happen. But as you say, we do have to realize the limitations. Before I came on to this meeting, I was having coffee with the Colorado ophthalmologists, and they were saying to me, well, telemedicine is great, but you really can't do ophthalmology by telemedicine for the most part. So you have to realize where it works and where it's a great benefit, and also where you can't do it.
Well, and just one little thing. So my dad's 97, and he's had a series of little mini seizures over the last couple of weeks, and he's been in the hospital twice. So the neurologist came into the hospital room. It's a pretty big hospital, 600, big hundreds of physicians. Neurologist came in. She came in on a TV screen, and she was able to pose questions to my dad and respond. And, instead of literally being there, being potentially exposed to COVID, and it's, it's in hospitals, we know that. She was able to work out of her office and deal with a lot more patients. And we're seeing that across the country. And it's these physician groups that are rightly so raising this issue with us, the reimbursement issues, those types of things. But that's why broadband is so important. And we don't just leave or depart from these rural areas that may not have access to that. So it's a big chunk of what we're trying to do. But also, as you look at the larger agenda of an infrastructure package, there's funds in that, as there have been in the last couple of COVID packages too.
Yeah. Well, we're about 2 minutes short of our close time, probably less than 2 minutes now. I want to be respectful because I know you're both busy. Let me just take a moment to say thank you for your statesmanship, your bipartisanship, the success you had in moving landmark legislation, which is going to stand the test of time and help a lot of individuals across this country. I applaud your future efforts on Cures 2.0 and wish you all the best success with that. And lastly, I would just say it's so refreshing to talk to the two of you, given all the partisan sniping that's been going on. You are two very experienced, accomplished legislators. I wish we had more of you in Congress today. And I just want to thank you again for taking time from your busy schedule to participate in this program. And with that, we'll conclude unless you have one final thing or two you want to say.
We miss you. You can come back and add to the bipartisanship. How's that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
just public service.
sometime, at some point in the far distant future, we'll be eligible for membership, but just want to remember this so you can give us a discount.
You'll be welcomed with open arms. All right.
Yeah.
On that note, we'll conclude the program. Thank you again. Bye-bye.